Welcome to the Sarpy County Board of Equalization meeting. It is Tuesday, March 7th, 2023 at 3 o'clock p.m. We have present today Commissioners Kelly, Klug, Warren, and Mixon and Burmeister. We also have Dan Hoynes, our county administrator, and Renee Landsman, our county clerk today, and also Dan Pittman, our county assessor. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item number 4 is the consent equalization agenda. Would anybody like to see any item removed from the consent agenda?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Moved to approve by Commissioner Warren, seconded by Commissioner Klug. Any discussion? Please vote.
Ayes 5, nays none, motion carried.
Item number 5.1, Bellevue Volunteer Fire Department request for a waiver of filing deadline to allow assessor to review exemption application form 451. Dan Pittman, County Assessor.
Good afternoon. BVFD LLC, located in Bellevue, was requested to file an application for property tax exemption. They did, but it was late, and in order to go ahead and hear that, the county board has to grant a waiver for the county assessor to consider the application for 2023.
Did I make a motion to approve?
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Klug and seconded by Commissioner Warren to approve. Any discussion, questions? Please vote.
Ayes 5, nays none, motion carried.
Item 5.2 is tax corrections 17134 to 17138. Dan Pittman, County Assessor.
There's nothing extraordinary here. Are there any questions on those?
Any questions for Dan?
Motion to approve?
Second.
Moved to approve by Commissioner Klug, seconded by Commissioner Kelly. Any discussion or questions? Please vote.
Ayes 5, nays none, motion carried.
All agenda items having been addressed as published, the Board of Equalization is adjourned.
We're good.
You ready? We'll move into the Board of Commissioners meeting. It is still March 7, 2023. It's 3:03 p.m. The Opens Meetings Act is posted on the back wall of the boardroom. Please silence all cell phones. We have present Commissioners Kelly, Klug, Warren, Mixon, and Burmeister. We also have Renee Landsman, Deputy County Administrator, our Deputy County Clerk, and Dan Hoynes, our County Administrator. Commissioners' announcements. Commissioner Mixon?
None. None. Nothing.
Item number 4 is the consent commissioners agenda. Would anybody like to see any items removed from the consent agenda?
Motion to approve. Second.
Moved to approve by Commissioner Warren, seconded by Commissioner Mixon. Any discussion? Please vote.
Ayes 5, nays none, motion carried.
Item 5.1 is Resolution 2023-065, 2022 to 2025 Sarpy County Public Employees Association Collective Bargaining Agreement. Dan Hoynes, County Administrator, Mark McQueen from Baird Home.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I defer my time to Mr. McQueen to explain the substantive provisions of the contract that will change if you choose to approve this. If you do choose to approve it, then that will be contract 5 of 6 over the last 14 months that we've successfully negotiated.
Good afternoon. So this was a long negotiation, as several others have been, and long and difficult for a number of reasons. One of which is Sarpy County came to these negotiations after a lot of legwork by its bargaining team, Dan Hoynes, Kate Gatewood, Mary Davis, to try to update and standardize the language in these contracts. That took a lot of time. It's difficult at the bargaining table, and it's never a welcome thing for our bargaining partners who represent the employees, but our negotiations were collaborative and constructive. And as Dan mentioned, in this particular case, we were able to successfully get to an agreement. These negotiations started in January, and we didn't achieve an agreement until the last week with the final communication from the PEA union group. Very briefly, the contents, the important highlights, it's a 3-year agreement like all of them that we've negotiated. Now remember, this contract expired last June, so we are well into the first year of this contract. 32 pages of language changes. I'll give you as much detail as you'd like, but typically people don't care a lot about language changes. What they do care about is the economic and benefit portions of the agreement. On the economic side, this agreement provides for wage increases over 3 years of 4% in the first year, 4% in the second year, and 3% in the third year. Now, that means that at minimum, employees who are covered by this agreement see an 11% increase over the course of a 3-year agreement. That's a little bit misleading because Sarpy County, like all similar political subdivisions, has a pay progression plan such that unless you're topped out at the highest paying step in the plan, each year you advance. So as an employee, you realize not just the across-the-board increases to each step that I just mentioned, 4, 4, 3, 11%, but for this particular bargaining unit, the incremental increase between steps are 3.8%. So what that means is minimum increase of 3% of 11%, even for those who are topped out, but those who are still advancing through the pay progression step, roughly half of them will realize an increase of 20% or above over the course of 3 years. So we're talking about pretty significant pay increases. Now, I want to emphasize the pay progression steps are not unusual in Sarpy County. They're very consistent with comparable counties. But it is important to recognize that, and you know, the wage increases, not only in these negotiations, but other negotiations, one of which we're going to talk about this morning, very, very controversial. You know, employees were looking for more money. There's a lot of reasons for that, including the economy and inflation and settlements with other political subdivisions. But in this particular case, we were able to reach agreement, I'm glad to say, and as Dan mentioned, 5 out of 6, so we are respectfully requesting your support and your approval for this agreement. Happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Mark? Is there a motion?
Make a motion to approve.
Second.
Motion to approve by Commissioner Klug, second by Commissioner Warren. Any discussion? Please vote.
Is it what it is? Ayes 5, nays none, motion carried.
Item number 5.2 is Resolution 2023-064, 2022 to 2025 Collective Bargaining Agreement for the Fraternal Order of Police Lodge Number 3, Law Enforcement Non-Sworn Covered Employees for unilateral implementation of Sarpy County's last, best, and final offer due to impasse. Dan Hoynes, County Administrator, Mark McQueen, Baird-Holm.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the board, I'll ask Mark to step up again. I'll defer most of the comments to him, but just for clarity, if this particular resolution passes, it will authorize the unilateral implementation, as you just articulated, read into the record, of the county's last, best, and final offer due to impasse. So I'll ask Mr. McQueen to give his perspective on the resolution.
Okay, we mentioned earlier, 5 of 6, we were successful in reaching an agreement, and I'm not happy, and everybody's disappointed that we didn't get 6 of 6. In this particular negotiations, we didn't get across the finish line to reach a tentative agreement subject to your approval. These negotiations started in roughly mid-August of last year. Got started a little bit later than some of the others, but we were juggling 5 sets of negotiations at that time. We exchanged multiple written proposals. We met on multiple occasions. We ultimately had to find a way to finish the negotiation process. Ideally, you reach an agreement, and that's obviously the goal. In this case, we weren't able to reach an agreement, so we got to a point where we had to issue what is known as a last, best, and final offer. And typically, a last, best, and final offer is issued when one party or the other reaches a point where they're no longer able or no longer authorized to make additional concessions at the bargaining table. These negotiations, as the others, were professional and collaborative. The parties conducted themselves admirably, as far as I'm concerned, at the bargaining table, and I'm speaking about the union representatives and their counsel, and of course, the county's bargaining team. But when we finished negotiations in early February, or delivered our final offer in late February, we still had language issues that were unresolved, and we still have economic issues that were unresolved. I can go into as much detail as you'd like, but again, most folks are primarily concerned on the economic side, and here our final offer, like the bargaining unit with the PEA group that I just described, included a 4-4-3 economic offer, 4% in the first year, retroactive to the contract's expiration last summer, 4% in the second year, and 3% in the third. Like the other bargaining units, there's a pay progression plan here. So your minimum increase across 3 years is 11%, but those who are advancing on the pay steps are realizing an average of 5.3, a little bit higher than that on average per step. So what that results in, minimum increase for those who are already topped out of 11% over the course of 3 years. And with the steps, the average increase is 24% over 3 years, so that's 8% per year. Not enough to get us to agreement. The union is bargaining for other economic terms, and I would expect that they'll have something to say about those economic terms and the underlying justification, which they have shared with us in detail through the bargaining process, and we've tried to transparently share with this board as much as possible. But our choices in this particular negotiations are continue to negotiate indefinitely or reach that stage where you say this is as good as it gets. That's a painful stage to get to. Nobody wants to get to that stage, but that's where we are. So the request of the board, as Dan mentioned, is to authorize unilateral implementation of this. It doesn't mean we'll have an agreement. It just means we implement the terms of our final offer, which to some degree is very helpful to employees because they're going to realize a back pay check for their retroactive pay, and then pursuant to the offer, be entitled to additional pay increases with each annual anniversary of the contract. So once again, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. Otherwise, I'll be quiet and allow you to do your business.
Mark, I'm going to ask, what, in a nutshell, what's the most significant sticking points in regards to language?
There's several. A lot of the language issues have an economic component as well. So the economics is not just about wages, but we had a disagreement over the amount of a health retirement account contribution. We had a disagreement over the level of retiree premium contributions or benefits for retiree and health insurance The union was bargaining for terms that resemble a different bargaining unit, the sworn group, so that was an open issue. We were not able to close the gap on educational incentive pay, again, an economic piece. We were not able to close our differences with respect to eligibility for sick leave payout for probationary employees. We were not able to close the gap on the duration of injured on duty pay at the county. So you get workers' compensation, but the county has what's known as injured on duty pay, which essentially protects the employee from any loss of income while they're unable to work as a result of a work-related injury. And SARPI has negotiated terms in each of the agreements that we've talked about previously. In this particular negotiations, we weren't able to eliminate that disagreement. We also had a disagreement over whether floating holidays that were unused at the time someone quit or resigned their employment from the county would be eligible for holiday pay, floating holiday pay payout. There was a disagreement, which would take some time to explain, but over the eligibility of folks who were either forced to work on an emergency snow day or a different type of an emergency as compared to those who were allowed to take time off, and how the county manages that with respect to paid time off. We were not able to close the gap and reach agreement on the sheriff's discretion to bring in new employees at a rate other than the first step in the pay progression plan. The county, facing staffing troubles that they have been facing, wanted some discretion to hire more experienced people at a higher rate if the sheriff or the hiring manager thought that that was important. We've also have a disagreement over the eligibility of part-time employees to advance on the pay progression step. There's the current standard is 2 years or 2,080 hours. That's because they're working on a part-time schedule, they wait for a longer period of time before their pay advances on the part-time or on the pay progression table. And I think that's about it. I don't know if that's a nutshell, but that's a quick summary on the number of outstanding issues. And as you can gather, there's some significant issues there and a gap between the parties, not just strictly on wages.
One other question, which would be the logical question. Why go a 3-year term? And why not say, well, I understand why not a 1-year term, because that's almost ready to expire, but why not situate a 2-year contract and keep third year open, or just negotiate a 2-year contract?
That's always an option. That wasn't the direction that I was provided as the lead negotiator for SARPI. And I think the short answer, Commissioner Warren, is the county has very intentionally tried to schedule these contracts so that they all expire at the same time historically, and that was the strategic decision even before we started any of these negotiations. The direction was to stay on the 3-year track for all of the collective bargaining agreements so that they all expire at the same time, and we negotiate new ones all at the same time, or leading up to that expiration point.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mark?
Thank you.
Okay. I understand that there's a request by a member of the union on behalf of the JJC to address the board. If you can state your name and then give your address, and then the time limit is 10 minutes.
My name is Kelly Robideau, and I am a member of the negotiating committee for FOP Lodge 3, the non-sworn bargaining contract. And I have worked at the JJC for 18 years. I'm sorry, what were the other?
Your address.
My address?
Yeah.
7414 South 170th Street. The reason I'm here to talk today is, as Mr. McQueen mentioned, there were several points of language in the contract that our bargaining unit did not agree with or did not come to a final agreement with, and our members have not had a chance to vote on those items yet. So we're not sure if that's something that would pass through our bargaining unit or not. But today I specifically wanted to talk about how the wages that are proposed are affecting our current staffing levels as well as our future staffing levels, our programming, and our morale at the JJC. So the JJC is specifically asking that our wages be considered separate from the rest of the bargaining unit for this 3-year period so that we can get to a place where we are able to be in a comparative market with other agencies around us and hopefully build our staffing levels back up to appropriate levels. To explain where our staffing crisis, as we are describing it, is at, we have 21 full-time JSOs, and JSOs are the officers that are typically the ones who are working in the pods with the youth or having the most direct contact with the youth that are on our programs. We have 21 full-time positions. Over the last 15 months, we have had 20 people leave the JJC. 18 of those have been resignations, and 2 of those have been employees that were hired and failed training during that 15-month period. So as you can see, that's a high number that has definitely impacted our ability to run our operations the way that we're supposed to. At times, we have run with 7 vacancies, which is 33% of our JSO staff. So it has made it difficult to staff those working in the housing unit as well as those working in our programs. When we have asked people their reason for leaving, of those 18 people that resigned during that time frame, 12 of them cited better pay as their reason for having to leave the JJC. They found jobs elsewhere that were paying higher, but for a comparable job. 9 of those people went to corrections or law enforcement. So these are people who are wanting to stay in the same field, wanting to do similar work, but just expecting more pay for that job. The other options given a lot were they went to other county jobs or jobs with better hours or hours that worked better with their schedules. We know in the last 3 months, not including those that have left, we have had 3 other people that we have received contact from other agencies, and they are actively in the hiring process. So this is a trend that is continuing. In 2022 alone, we have hired 11 new employees, and already 3 of those have resigned. 2023, we've hired 2 new employees already, and 1 of them has already resigned. And the hiring process is not a simple task. It's something where we post a job description. Our administration is making those phone calls. 2022, we made over 160 phone calls to set up interviews to hire new JSOs. And I will say that unlike some of the other comparable jobs in the area, we have high expectations of the staff that we hire. These staff are expected to have experience in the field, degrees in the field. We do background checks, drug screening. We also require that they pass a polygraph. So we are having professionals come into this job. So we have a high expectation of who it is that we're hiring. So our pool is already limited. And we are seeing, in years past, we would post a position and there would be 30, 40 people apply for it. And we are debating over the top 2 or 3 that we want to send up through the process, picking who we want. We most often now are looking at them and saying, who can we go with? Who can we make work? Of course, we're still getting wonderful applicants that we move forward with, but more than we used to, we are having to pick people who are going to meet the requirements, but aren't to that level that we had expected in the past. We did a survey of our staff that are working at the JJC to ask them kind of where are they at in their feelings with all of this. We did survey staff and to paint a picture of who responded to the survey. The vast majority of them have been at the JJC 5 years or more, and the plurality of those staff have been at the JJC for 10 years or more. So these are people who have made a career out of working at the JJC. And when asked if they enjoy their job, the majority of them said they do enjoy their job, either agree or strongly disagree. So these are people who want to work with us, they like the field and the work that we do. However, when we asked them if they've looked for other employment in the last 6 months, those that responded, 68% of them said that they have actively seeked other jobs in the last 6 months. And these are people who are still employed with us. So again, this trend is continuing. Of those who left comments on why, the majority, over 75%, mentioned pay, and 62% mentioned high stress due to staffing levels. So what we're having to do to fill in those gaps, again, we've had 5 to 7 vacancies quite often. One is paying overtime, that's the most obvious. To paint a picture, in 2020 and 21 combined, overtime that was specifically related to personnel shortages, we paid a total of $63,590. This is specifically personnel shortages combined 2020 and 21. 2022, we paid $118,692. So obviously our overtime costs have increased dramatically, but those are to fill those gaps. And primarily it's been to fill the gaps in the holdover unit. To also kind of paint how short we have been, in the past, our administration team of 4 very rarely took overtime. It usually has been our JSOs and supervisors that are doing that. In 2020, admin got under 3,000 in overtime. 2021, administration got 5,600 in overtime. 2022, administration had 15,410 in overtime. That does not include the hours, the months that we changed our schedule to cover nights and weekends because there was nobody to fill those spots. In addition to us, the people who are covering are our programming staff. So we are pulling people whose job is to work on the road, to cover those care positions, to check on those kids on house arrest. They've been pulled off of those jobs to cover in the holdover unit. So we are always making sure that housing is appropriately staffed, it is safe, our employees are well-trained, and we have enough people there. But it does a couple things. It makes it so we're not able to run the programs the way that they're designed, the way that they are court-ordered to be ran, but we're also limiting our backup. An example is, a few months ago, we had a help an officer call at the JJC, and it was an evening where we don't have a lot of people working in the building, and traditionally, we would say, hey, we're seeing there's going to be issues, but we had nobody to pull from because all of our staff was already pulled to the building. Our staff are working with higher risk youth that are in the facility, and we're seeing those come out in numbers. In 2022, we had 20 IODs compared to 3 in 21. In 2022, we had 17 assaults on staff compared to 7 in 2020. 10 assaults on juvenile to juvenile compared to 4 in 2020. And we're seeing a lot more youth that are held at the JJC strictly for adult charges. We have always moved to a least restrictive supervision is what we hope for our kids. So we're getting kids with us now that used to be secure. When we send kids secure, and oftentimes that can happen because we can't maintain a kid at our facility, in part because of staffing levels. So we're sending kids to DCYC, which is costing us $108,000 a year, $314,000 a year, $155,000 a year, and that keeps adding up. When we talk about programming and how we've kind of lessened that, our facilities in our program actually do make the JJC money, sometimes $1 million, sometimes $515,000, so we're kind of varied across that point. But really what we're asking for our staff is that they be paid comparable to the market that we are seeing around us. DCYC right now is offering $25 an hour for their booking clerks as well as their supervision staff. Our own Sarpy County Community Corrections, their entry-level officers make $24.75. Their job description most closely matches our house arrest program staff, but in addition to that job description, our staff cover in the holdover. They work nights, they work weekends, they work holidays, so the expectation on them is much higher. Currently, they are making $21.53 an hour. With the proposed contract, they would start at $22.39 an hour. Which is nowhere near the other agencies. The YRTCs are paying $25 an hour. The Juvenile Detention Center is paying $25 an hour. Community programs, almost $25 an hour. So that's what we're asking for our JSOs, is to start at $25 an hour. We think that less than that is going to continue to make it difficult for us to recruit employees as well as retain those employees. And it's affecting us across the board with our programming not having the support and staff that they need, as well as our staff having burnout. Our staff are tired. They feel like we can't run our programs appropriately. And I will also say, and my last point is, one thing that we continue to hear from our youth, we continue to hear from our parents, is how professional our employees are, how much they appreciate our programs. I've gone to training and conferences across the state, and over again, they have used Sarpy as the model. Oftentimes when I report data to different agencies and there's other places involved, they give our contact information out and say, contact Sarpy so you can learn how they do it. Or we've had people come and look at us to try to model our programs. So we know that they're successful. We know that they're recognized across the state as being successful. We have parents who appreciate our programs. We have parents who, for almost 10 years, have been sending us cookies and Christmas cards for the work that they did. And our staff, their point right now is that they feel very frustrated that they can't run the programs the way that they're intended to do. So even though we're making sure housing is staffed and it is safe, everybody is feeling that frustration of, we're just getting by. We're just keeping our head above water. And as soon as we hire a few, we lose a few. And so we're continuing that. We've spent over 2,000 hours just training these new employees. And again, they keep leaving. So over $40,000 in 2022 just to train new hires. And we've lost almost half of them already. So it's a waste of resources just in that aspect. I think I've hit my limit on time.
Does anybody have questions for Ms. Robideau? Thank you for bringing the board this information. We appreciate it. That will close the comment period. Any questions from the board?
You can have another 2 minutes.
Tammy, were you here for questions today?
I was just here for questions. I couldn't possibly pass Kelly's eloquent speech, but wanted to be here for questions and support.
Yeah, that was my understanding too. I just wanted to be sure we weren't
Absolutely.
missing you. Anybody have questions for Kelly or for Tammy? Okay, comments or additional considerations for the board?
Question for Mark. So once the last best and final is issued, does that mean we can't go back and address some of the language issues in the contract that could be amended at a later time? Or does that just all stop at this point?
You have flexibility to engage the union in additional negotiations during the life of this agreement. Sometimes the parties negotiate memorandums of agreement or changes to a collective bargaining agreement. That's unusual, but the door's not closed on that. And just for clarity, and when I communicated the last best and final offer in this instance to opposing counsel, I wanted to emphasize what I had heard from the board, and that was there's an interest, I don't know if the term deep dive was the correct description, but there's an interest in further investigating and learning more about what's going on at the JJC in particular, and to try to assist in addressing some of the staffing concerns and the turnover concerns that Kelly so eloquently addressed. So what I was trying to do with that communication is set the expectation that while that doesn't necessarily change anything with respect to the final offer we've been authorized to make, there may be an opportunity there to, through the collective bargaining process during the life of this agreement, to find additional solutions, whether that's recruiting strategies or whether that's economic items. Remains to be seen, or other operational type of techniques or strategies.
Any other questions for Mark? Does anyone have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved to approve by Commissioner Klug, seconded by Commissioner Kelly. Any further discussion by the board?
The only comment I'm going to make, I mean, these are obviously never easy issues, but I I regret the part where we're at in the negotiations. But I still keep open the door that I hope that we can continue to talk, do that deep dive or whatever it might be into some of the recruiting strategies, or maybe we need to look more specific at renegotiating potentially some pay. If there, is that a possibility? Whatever that might look like, that deep dive. But I also understand from the other side, as Bill makes it very clear, we've got a budget that is rapidly approaching, and we've got to meet some deadlines and some guidance on that as well, so.
Other comments from the board? Please vote.
Ayes 5, nays none, motion carried.
All agenda items having been addressed by the board as published, the Board of Commissioners is adjourned.